So welcome to the online discussion Germany Votes 2025. Key takeaways are organized by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation Office for the United States and Canada, located in Washington and Ottawa. My name is Swen Steinberg. I teach as assistant professor at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. I'm also affiliated scholar of the German Historical Institute in Washington. I would like to begin by acknowledging that this event was planned, organized, and is hosted on the traditional territories of indigenous people. Speaking of myself, and here in Kingston, it is the land of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. Even though we are gathering in a virtual space, and many of you are joining us from distant places around the world, I believe that it is important to acknowledge that we are grateful to live and work on this land here on Turtle Island. Last Sunday, federal elections took place in Germany. Following the European elections held in June 2024 and 3 regional elections in Germany in September 2024, which already highlighted a notable shift towards the right-wing populist fringes and new party formations, our virtual event will discuss perspectives and the most recent federal election results and what they reveal about the state of German democracy and political culture. As Germany navigates economic pressures, geopolitical challenges, and shifting voter dynamics, we will explore key takeaways from the election on Sunday, implications for and perspectives of Social Democrats, and consider the ins and outs of coalition formation as parties negotiate power-sharing agreements in an increasingly fragmented political landscape. What challenges and opportunities lie ahead for progressives in Germany and across Europe? How will the next government respond to growing social and economic divides? Just as a brief reminder, and this is your catchword, Knut, and this is a very good way for me to thank my 2 co-organizers, Knut Panknin and Jordan Leichnitz, for organizing this with me. Just as a brief reminder where we are and where we have been. In the 2021 federal election, the Social Democratic Party, led by Olaf Scholz, secured 25.7% in the vote, becoming the largest party, while the conservative Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, experienced a significant decline to 24.1%. The Greens achieved a historic height of 14.7%, and the far-right Alternative for Germany saw also a decrease to 10.4%. This election led to the formation of the so-called traffic light coalition government comprising the SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democratic Party, the FDP, the Liberal Party in Germany, with Olaf Scholz as chancellor. In contrast, the February 2025 election marked a notable shift. The conservative CDU under Friedrich Merz, who will be the next chancellor, regained prominence with 28.5% of the vote, while the right-wing AfD surged 20.8%, becoming the second largest party in Germany. The support of the Social Democrats dwindled to 16.4%, and the Greens also saw a decline to 11.6%. The Liberals did not make it into the parliament, while the Left Party scored a surprising high result of 8.8%. The participants of our conversation today look from various perspectives on these developments, politics, public opinion, political analysis, and all of this together. So let me briefly introduce to you our panelists, and I start with Delara Burkhardt. Delara is a member of the European Parliament for the Social Democratic Party in Germany, the SPD, since 2019, and is therefore a member of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. As a member of the European Parliament's Committee on the Environment, she works mainly on climate and biodiversity protection and the circular economy. Moreover, she works on the topic of migration in the European Parliament's Committee on Home Affairs. Our second panelist is Catrina Schläger. Since early 2020, Catrina leads the International Policy Analysis Unit of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. Previously, she was head of the Shanghai office of the foundation and was responsible for evaluation and development policy in the Global Policy and Development Division. So, a member of the European Parliament and a distinguished political analyst are my high bar for the next hour, and I'm really looking forward to it. But before we start, just 2 sentences about housekeeping. The first part of this 1 hour event is a conversation between Delara and Catrina. This is followed by responses to questions all of you in the virtual room can put into the Q&A section of our Zoom meeting. We will bring them to the attention of our panelists. So to the audience, again, the invitation, please feel free and use the Q&A section throughout the entire conversation. We will, and I will try my very best, multiple tasking to include your thoughts into our online event in the next hour. So now let's go to work. And I would like to start with a couple of perspectives and questions, and then we will see if there are more questions coming from the audience. And we might already have a conversation in the first couple of minutes. So first, I wanted to start with a more general question. So Germans voted on Sunday a new federal parliament. We know the results since Monday morning, Central European time. And my question to you, Delara and Catrina, is what surprised you the most and maybe what not? And going with the alphabet, I hand it over to Catrina.
Okay, thank you, Sven, and also to my colleagues for having me here. It's a great pleasure, and I think it's wonderful that you have such a great interest in the elections, although the election results for us are not very, well, promising and not very favorable. So what has been a surprise? Well, actually, when you look at the polls in advance, you see that there are not so many surprises. The lines in the polls, they were almost completely flat for the whole time of the election campaign. You won't see any bumps up or down. It's really very, very stable. So the election result as such, of course, is a surprise when you compare it to the elections 2021, but we see a development that led up to this result. Of course, there are some very disappointing and unpleasant surprises in the results. It's the strength of the AfD, especially when you look at on the constituency level, also when you look at age groups and professional groups. I think this is something that needs to worry us a lot. But you also see something maybe as a good surprise or on the more pleasant side is that you see that the left party gained such great support after we had a very fierce debate on migration, which led to almost doubling their share of votes as compared to the last election. So they ended up very, very high. That has been seen in the polls as well, but not on such a high level, and it didn't pay out for us Social Democrats. Another surprise that I would like to add, and then I would hand over to Delara to see what her surprises are, is something that I haven't read so far in the analysis yet. It is something that we observed in the digital space. Whereas in the previous election, also when we look at the European election, maybe Delara can also say a little bit about that, is that the AfD was the overarching actor and political party in the digital space. And they had a really dominant role there. And to some extent, the democratic parties, especially the left party, but also the Social Democratic Party, were able to actually counter that overwhelming presence of the AfD. When you look at TikTok numbers, for example, we really outperformed the AfD during the election campaign. And I think this is something that we need to also keep in mind as a positive note. And that took me actually by surprise.
Okay, thank you. So, Delara.
Yeah. And not many surprises left, I have to say. As Catrina said, the election result itself, it was not a surprise, as we have been seeing this polls for a while now, and they had been relatively stable. What I considered to be very surprising was the high turnout of the voters. It was 82%, and the highest number in the past was in 1987. So it's been a while since we had such a high turnout in the election, which also can be explained with the mobilization, especially from the right and from the AfD supporters and the left supporters, because most of the non-voters voted in favor of these parties, which can also be explained with a very, as someone who has been campaigning a lot, I can say that the problem about this campaign, especially from our perspective, was the lack of mobilization of a lot of citizens, because in the center, in the left center, there was no change that this campaign was spreading. Also, we have to say, as Social Democrats, self-critically, that, for example, the so-called traffic light coalition parties were running with the same candidates that were already there in the last government. So I would say in the political mainstream, there was no real mobilizing candidacy that really guided the polls or made some interesting moves within the parties who were already in the government, but also the lack of sympathy Germans have for the designated Chancellor Friedrich Merz also was not mobilizing a lot for there. So we have to say that the high turnout of the election really can be put into the hands or in the success of the far right, but also on the left, which especially on the left side was mobilized through youth, which I think is a very, for me, a hopeful sign that as we saw in the last elections where the far right was polling very well among the youth, we now see that the youth is also there polarized, which of course also is no good news. But this is a little bit of reflection of the state of the political debate right now, that we see a very polarized society in Germany and all over Europe, and the success of the far right has been there for a while now, also showing off in the European elections. So also there, it was not really a surprise that this was happening. And we also see the splitting of the different turnouts within Germany, especially the high turnouts for the AfD in Eastern Germany, as something that we have been observing for a while. So also no real surprises there. So I can only say the only thing that surprised me was that the turnout was mobilized through the far right.
So there are already a couple of aspects on the table here. Let's go a little bit step by step. So I mean, we have the election results right now, and so now we have coalition formation. That will shape, of course, Germany's domestic policies and economic strategies going forward, for sure. But from your perspective, what does this mean, this coalition options that are now on the table for progressive politics coming from Germany and within a wider framework of European politics? And I'm asking this specifically regarding the notion of the becoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz in his last speech before the election, when he claimed that the time of left-wing politics is over in Germany. So what does this mean from your perspective and from an SPD or social democratic perspective for the next 4 years and for a wider range? Whoever.
Maybe for start, what I think really we have to say is that there are really not a lot of democratic options on the table. The only government we can form is the CDU-SPD government. We could put the Greens also on board, which again also is not a very popular proposal in Germany right now because of the aftermath of the traffic light coalition. So Germans tend to have a favor on the two-party coalition, and we have a so far condor sanitaire against the far right. So also CDU at least for official government building. They claim that they will not go together with the Alternative for Germany, which we have seen in the Bundestag already happening on a policy issue on migration, but also is the brutal reality we see now on the European level for a while now. So everyone was surprised in Germany when the CDU was building majorities in the German Bundestag with the far right, which was historically the first time since the Federal Republic was founded. But we see this tendency in the European Parliament for a while now, that especially on issues that are progressive, that have been put forward by progressives, social rights, the climate agenda of the European Union, that the conservatives and the far right were working together to push back legislation that we have been pushed forward in the last years as progressives. So the reality of this election result is something that we also, again, already have there on the European level. There are no majorities for progressive politics. So you have to play very, very clever now to get anything through. And this is, what I wanted to add on this so-called "we are crazy people in the left" quote of Friedrich Merz. This was his agenda. His agenda was to appease with the right, and he wants to pull back from everything that we've been fighting as Social Democrats for a while now. And we have to say that there is a lack of trust, especially in the persona of Friedrich Merz, but also on the CDU-CSU, who has to prove that after this flirts with the right, they are ready and able to form majorities in the democratic middle again, which has not been the case for a while now. So who's now in turn? Well, of course, the Social Democratic Party, after this election result, the historically worst election result we ever had, we are in the position where we really have to make sure that we look inside our structures and see where we made our mistakes. And I think there are a lot of them. I don't know if we will talk about them, but there are a lot of things we have been doing wrong in the last years in the question of how we communicate, how we address people, the agenda setting we had. And this is a big thing that we have to work on now. And it's going to be brutal to do this in the government with CDU, where we will have to make compromises that will probably hurt sometimes. So for the coalition talks that are now lying ahead of us, I think the first person who has to move and has to change his approach is Friedrich Merz, because he actively put the gap between the Social Democratic Party and CDU even bigger, and we have a lot of very divergent stances on some of the critical issues we have to find solutions on. For example, when it comes to the question of public funding of the transition and how we can organize security and the funding for security and defense. So there are a lot of big things that we have to overcome, but we have to see also movement from both sides. And this is what I don't see with CDU now for a while. And this has to change in order to be able to find compromises, because this is what we are ready for, finding compromises in the democratic middle, but we are not ready to compromise for everything.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Catrina.
I fully agree with what Delara has said. And maybe just to add, when you look at the previous grand coalitions and you see what Merkel did, is she moved the Christian Democrats further to the left. So there was no room for social democracy anymore, but it paid out in more balanced social and economic policies. But now I don't see that with Friedrich Merz happening. So he will stick to his very conservative approach. You see that also with his party manifesto, or the new party manifesto that the Christian Democrats have, which is pretty conservative when you compare it to the previous one. How this will then actually pay out or turn out in the coalition talks, I think that's really hard yet to tell, actually. Maybe he would think, well, okay, we need to leave the Social Democrats some room. Yeah, yes, maybe, but maybe he also thinks, well, now I'm in charge and it's for us. And this was what he was campaigning for, political change. Now here it comes. And in all kinds of means, in all kinds of areas. And this is something I think where Social Democrats are not in the position to follow that. So when it comes to the question if Social Democrats are in a really weak position when it comes to the negotiations. I would still argue, no, we are not. I would say, well, Christian Democrats have to move as well, and there is something that we can bargain for.
Thanks a lot, Delara. If you want to respond, or if you want to.
No, I think it's really, really true, especially the shift to the right in the program of the Conservative Party we have been seeing. And on the European level, again, to compare, we have seen that the strength of the Conservatives has now put in the way, as we don't have fixed majorities in the European Parliament, that they choose where they want to seek the majority. So on migration, on climate, they will tend to go with the right, and on exactly, especially democracy wash, I always call it like this, democracy wash their candidacies, they are ready to count on the social democratic votes. And this is not enough for us. We are not the persons who will just vote in favor of the chancellor and then they can choose majorities as they want. If they want to commit to a government with the Social Democrats, they have to deliver on some of our key issues. And this is what we will have to discuss if there are rooms and to maneuver and to do so.
I would like to follow up. Thanks a lot. I would like to follow up with a couple of topics you already pointed to, and I will start with the voter turnout and the mobilization aspect, because this might be interesting for the wider audience we have here in the virtual room in North America. So Canada, for example, there's an upcoming federal election as well this year. Delara, you already said a few words about the voter turnout and what this really means in the virtual space, because my first thought when I saw the voter turnout of this federal election in Germany was, okay, participation is sexy again, or why are the numbers that high? But on the other hand, you can also interpret it as a result of polarization and the mobilization triggered by shifts in public discourse, or even a response of feeling of being misrepresented. If you can say a few more words from your perspective, what we are learning, if we can learn from this high voter turnout, but also with a specific perspective on voter mobilization and communication for the upcoming elections. So what went wrong? Probably because the numbers on the far right side are very high, and the numbers for the Social Democratic Party are very low after this election campaign. So this is kind of what I wanted to hear your arguments about and your opinion about. And whoever wants to go first.
I start? Okay. Well, when it comes to voter mobilization, I think what we know from research is the higher the income, the higher the education level, the higher the voter turnout in constituencies. And with these elections, we saw a rise through all kinds of, well, everywhere in Germany. Delara already said that there is some variance when it comes to the regions. That's absolutely true. And especially when you look, for example, at constituency where you already had a high voter turnout, which is the highest you had in Munich, for example, and you compare those results from last election to this election, you see, yes, it increased again. So they are way above the all average. But also you can see that in constituencies where you had lower voter turnout, which are mainly poor constituencies, where you have a lot of migrants living, where you have a lot of not so well-educated people suffering from bad economic infrastructure and so on, there you also can see a true total rise of the voter turnout. So people actually felt this is an election that I do care about. So it was something at stake for them, and it mobilized like on all kinds of levels. And when you look at who mobilized the most, also what you've said, AfD was number one, Christian Democrats number two, then the parties on the left came in. I would support your argument, Sven, and also what Delara has already said, that it was on the migration issue. And I think this is something, maybe Delara, you probably know more about that from other European countries. when we see an election coming up and it is mainly about the migration issue, it mobilizes on the right. It is also mobilizing on the left as a counterbalance, but not as much as it is on the right. And I think that leaves us with some actual challenges, because the easy answer to say, well, just closing borders, which was basically the idea of the far right, and not only closing, but also remigration of migrants, this is something that is not, it is not realizable. It's nothing that we are so far away from that this is actually going to be applicable, but it's easy to understand. And when we come with our complex answers, I think this is something where on a communicational level, we need to do much better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very much agree on that. As you also put the online mobilization on the table, I might add on that, because I think what we have seen so far, and what is also a threat to our democracies that we have to discuss, is that the way how algorithms work on all big platforms, they tend to push polarized information. They tend to push hard emotions instead of facts and clarity. So of course, I would say that extreme positions in general have a bigger success rate on the social media platforms, how they work. And of course, we also see active manipulation of platforms to, for example, on X, to actually push AfD, and also Elon Musk as a person who pushed AfD on their platform. But also on TikTok, we have seen doubtful situations of how algorithm pushed single candidates. So we really have to analyze this. This was less a problem in the German elections, but for example, in Romania, we have a very problematic case that we have to now, also where TikTok already is held accountable by the European Commission. So we see interference and the polarization fueled by the way how algorithms work and how they tend to now influence our democracy, which is something that I take very, very seriously. And I think we are kind of powerless right now in Europe that we have to change, because this is an active threat to our democracy that we are not able to discuss. On the question of migration, I just can agree that it is mobilizing the right. We have seen in all European member states that where also conservative parties moved more right-wing in the rhetorics on the migration, they actually lost to the right. So any talks about migration in a campaign will always benefit the right and not the democratic forces in part. We haven't seen it only in the far right, that you gave simple solutions that will never work and never organize or manage migration in a better way. We also see it with Friedrich Merz, who actually made proposals that are against basic European laws. So he would actually risk Germany to get out of the European Union with the proposals he set on the table. And this is this problem, I think. The question of why the people were so unhappy and why they fell for this agenda was because there is this fear of losing control. A lot of people are very much overwhelmed by the wars, by the economic situation in the country. They are afraid that they will lose their status of living. And this is sometimes you have to say, when you just look at the bare numbers, a very irrational debate, because in numbers, we are not so bad off in Germany. So everything is not as bad as it was described in this campaign. But this was something that, again, fueled the polarized debate, which I think is the most worrying thing, that democratic forces weren't able in this campaign to structurally talk about real issues that we have with our economy, making proposals that would actually solve the situation. And just, again, why it's so odd to use also migration. We know that the German society is aging in a very, very hard way. So we need migration, and we need an organized way of migration in order to make sure that our economy will be existent in a few years. So it was a very irrational addressing of the topic of migration, which only, again, benefited the right.
And catching up with this, because this is a very important point. So the topic of migration and the focal points in the election campaign itself, that might not, in my opinion, that didn't really address the life and working world of the ordinary people living in Germany. So the migration part is, of course, a topic, but it's just one of them. And we are also talking about wages and pensions and all those kind of things and social security, and nobody talked about this. Okay, but when we talk because we already touched upon the far right issue here and this perspective, there is obviously a division between the East and the West when it comes to the election results. There are regional differences between East and West when it comes to the far right vote. What do you think? How will this influence the social and economic policy priorities in the upcoming years? Because or the question is more, how did the right-wing AfD become the dominant party in the East? As a very simple question, and this is obviously not a sudden surge as it has been building since 2013, when the party won, when the AfD won more seats than the left party in East Germany, East German states. And again, that's why it's nice to have both of you here. How this does this aligns with developments we can see in other European states at the very same time? So is this just a German East-West divide issue, or is this even a broader context the SPD Social Democrats have to address as well?
That's a very big question.
It is. I'm here for the big questions.
You're here for the big questions, yes. But you were of course you're absolutely right. This did not happen overnight. It has been quite a long development since now we have these figures at 20.8% of the AfD. I think on a very general level, when it comes to the rise of the AfD, I think there are three factors that are most important. The first is a felt distance between political elites and voters. And this led to major heights of distrust in the political system and political actors at all. And it was the search for somebody else who had the more promising answers to problems that everybody felt was at stake. So first argument, I would say, distance from political elites. The second, I would say, is the consequences of austerity politics. It is what people feel in their daily life is that the German state is not functioning anymore, not anymore as it has been before when it comes to infrastructure, childcare, healthcare, elderly care, pension system. You will find a lot of talks about the unpunctuality of the German trains and so on, collapsing bridges, and this is something which actually, of course, causes a lot of annoyance among the people, and but also mistrust. Well, I'm paying taxes. Where does all the money go? So why is this actually happening? And I would say it's a consequence of austerity politics. And the third part is also something that you already said is, no, Delara said that is it is the experience of the poly crisis. So these crises, they are not distant anymore. They are not far away. They are actually happening at my kitchen table. I have to look if I can pay my bills. Energy prices just rose 2 years ago, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pay for that. So on a general level, I would say yes, there are more reasons than just one. When it comes to Eastern Germany, I would say, of course, history plays in, but I'm actually not very good to talk about Eastern Germany. There are other researchers and analysts who have much more deeper knowledge. And but what I would think what we have to discuss is, yes, we have these numbers in Eastern Germany, but not only in Eastern Germany. It's actually a German-wide problem. When you look at who actually scored at a second place in Southwest Germany, it was AfD. It was not the other democratic parties. So, and you see that it is, yes, when you look at the landscape right now, you have the blue East Germany and the black West Germany. But if you look at who was in second race or in second place, you see that AfD candidates are catching up. And actually, this is something that we should be worrying about. It's not only Eastern Germany, it's a German-wide problem. And this needs to be addressed policy-wise, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So, Delara, how do we address this policy-wise?
Well, I actually don't have so much to add on the analysis. Just adding one point that that I'm also not born or raised or anything in Eastern Germany, so I grown up in the north, so I don't have this experience of an Eastern German reality, which in fact is still there in numbers. So there are structural problems. There's a lack of infrastructure in the east of Germany still, even so many years after the unification. We are having less retirement fees, rente, you know what I mean. You get less funding, or you have lower wages in the east of Germany. We have a lot of structural problems that are way harder in Eastern Germany still. And what my friends from Eastern Germany always tell me is that this experience and this reality of transitions not working out and not giving the promise that they were promising is something that is very much felt in the east of Germany, and which is again now triggered by the polycrises we have. And now people fear that again there will be a big change and transition where they will not be part of. So this is something that explains the higher or the quicker success of the AfD in Eastern Germany at one point. But again, also I'm not an expert on that. What I see from a Western German perspective, that there where we have structural weaknesses in the East, in the West too, and where we have low-income households, there is also again a high turnout of the AfD. So it's a structural problems about the question of being part of society, of having good promises, and the fear of not being able to uphold the living standard for the future generation that fuels people, which is ironic because in the end, when you look at the program of the AfD, it only delivers for the richest. It really gives no answers on the fears that people have and that are threatening their daily lives. And this is really the odd situation where I think the left party, again, had done a great job in order to mobilize an alternative that was positive. They talked about how people can afford housing again. They talked about how they can take away from the rich to invest in infrastructure. And I think our campaign was not brave enough to address this as sharp, because in the end, the Alternative for Germany is not doing politics for the people that vote for them. This is something that you really have to work out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks so much. I have one last question before I will move to the chat, because we have to the Q&A section of our session. We have a couple of very interesting questions here, and I think it's wise to have your response to this. But I would like to come back to this voter turnout and the aspect of gender and age in this entire so to the demographics and what this means and how this influences the election or how this influences the election results in general. That's the one point, but also what are the implications for further social and economic policy that is coming from exactly this. I'm asking this from the SPD perspective, especially with regard to the progressive vote. So the Left Party, for example, in Germany, so I mentioned this at the beginning, they scored pretty much surprisingly high on Sunday, but especially with young women. What does this kind of fact mean for the SPD and going forward in the for the next years when it comes to policy making? So is this a group that should be more in coming into the focus of policy making? Question mark. So again, the broader question is what does gender and age in the voter turnout tell us about going forward? What is going on with the SPD and party politics in the next years?
So first, it shows how much polarized our society is, because we have a big gap between male and female youngsters. Males tend to vote more right, females more left. So this is the first thing that we can take. And I don't think it's only a policy problem of SPD. We actually had one of the leftist programs for a few ages that we had as a party program. I think it was more about the perception of Olaf Scholz, but also of the SPD in general. As we have been the leading party of the last coalition, as we have been in power for a while now, building compromises with conservatives, a lot of people perceive us as the party of the status quo, which is a very, very dangerous thing for a progressive party to happen, because if you are considered to be the status quo, then you are not the force that will lead the change that you promise in your electoral program. And I think this is the perception that we have to change about SPD. And this is something that we really have to work hard on with the renewal of the party now. We have to find new heads that will be perceived as a more credible, future-oriented part of the party, because this is also what let me say that as a younger member of the European Parliament. Always when I say that I'm an SPD, people are surprised, because just from the looks and being a young woman in politics, they wouldn't perceive me being a social democrat. And this is something that is annoying me personally, because I always have to explain that I'm not green, I'm not left, I'm social democrat. But this is a perception that is just SPD has to change about us to make sure that more people feel heard by us. But this, of course, is the question also about how we draw the lines in the next coalition, but actually work on us and be a more credible actor in that sense.
Yeah, Catrina, do you want to weigh in? Mm-hmm.
I think Delara pointed to all the important points as when it comes to age and the gender divide. I think I don't have to add anything.
Okay, then I will simply move it to the Q&A section, because we have a couple of questions here and some of them are very big. The first one from Anne McGrath. I think I'll leave this for the last question I will pose to you. The question is, what are the next steps for the SPD? So you can already think about this. There is a very interesting question from Terence Toland. That is coming with, let's say, attention, a fear people in other countries have when it comes to election campaigns. So he is asking what role, if any, do you think Elon Musk and JD Vance's boosting for the AFD had on the electorate? And this is indeed a debate we can see here, for example, in Canada as well. So is there influence coming from the outside when it comes to election campaigns? So can you say a few words about this inside-outside election campaign influence and this kind of aspect?
I think that's not easy to tell if it really had an effect. It had a media effect. That's for sure, because it gave, like, the AfD and especially Alice Weidel, who has been the so-called Spitzenkandidat from the AfD, a lot of media presence just for free. On the one hand, on X with Elon Musk during that talk, but also it was reported as on a very high level in all kinds of other media stations, outlets, in newspapers, and news stations reported on that. So it was perceived. When it comes to J.D. Vance and his talk at the Munich Security Conference, I think that stayed rather in a small circle of a very on a very expert level. But I would say it still has a longer influence, because this just shows how the normalization of an anti-democratic kind of point of view just is just there, and is not, there's no chance, or there was no chance of direct a direct kind of interaction with J.D. Vance. He just left the stage, and his words were just unanswered, and it was by the following panelist, when he was already out of the room and with his delegations, to give a response on that. So there was actually no talk, there was no conversation about what he said. And I think this is just a symbol of how some of the right-wing rhetoric is fueling in. And I'm not sure if it's really too hard, if it's really for me to say that it was right-wing rhetoric, especially with a North American audience. But at least to us as observers, it felt as if he was repeating the same talking points as the AfD would have said if they would have joined the Munich Security Conference. And I think Delara already pointed to the question of what does social media mean when it comes to mobilization and polarization. So yes, I would say it had an influence, but if we see that actually in numbers, I would doubt that. It's more on a discourse level where we see that.
I also consider it more being a proof point for a problem that we have, and that the right is extremely well aligned. They are very well organized. They have the same agendas. They have the same rhetorics. They learn from each other how to use social media, how to have a big audience with the theses that they hold. They are addressing the same topics, so they have a big network. And I always repeat something that a Brazilian colleague, so from the Social Democratic Brazilian Party, told me, that nobody in Europe cared about the struggles of progressives in Brazil before Lula won the election. And this is something that is completely different with the right. They have a good network. They support each other in their agendas. And I think it's time for progressives again to also form this in these alliances, to also address, have more similar approaches and talking points, because I think this is the power of what has been shown by Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, that if you give people the impression that you're not the only one, but you have a big, powerful international network that addresses the same problems and struggles like you do, this gives them more influence and more credibility in a way, which I think has to be considered by the social democratic parties and progressive parties in general to how, and I know we are working together with Friedrich Ebert Foundation also to fix that, and to again have stronger progressive voices and networks on that. But I think this is something that is the proof point of what we have seen. But also numbers, I don't know how it turned out, how it helped AfD.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So maybe this is pointing in a very similar direction, because it's about strategy. So Jennifer Howard asks, I would love to hear more about the approach of the Left Party. And this is coming from a Canadian perspective in this case, of course, because we have upcoming elections tomorrow in Ontario and later this year on the federal level. So the question is, I guess, The Social Democrats are in decline after this election, or the election results shows this, but the Left Party is in kind of an upswing, not a huge one, but it is an obvious one. So how do you think strategically, how do we deal with this? So what are your perspectives on the positioning of the SPD, maybe learning from this kind of election results for the Left Party?
So as SPD, I think we consider we consider ourselves being nerds, because we always want to have solutions for everything, and we always try to have an approach that gives us things or like answers to all the problems that are there. And I think this is something that the left did differently, and that we also have to consider while campaigning, is to focus on some key demands that you want to push forward in a campaign, and of course also then building majorities where you also stick, and you make sure that you also can deliver on the promises that you make, because this is the difference between the left and the Social Democratic Party. The left is not very much in risk to actually deliver on the promises they are doing and finding the majorities, and this is something that is very different. But I think as it was the NDP question to how to learn from it, actually I met a colleague from NDP a while ago, and we also talked about how difficult it is to campaign with left issues. Because, for example, tax, nobody likes to talk about taxes and higher taxes. So this is a really critical issue that we have to talk about. They really put it on the daily struggles on people. I'm not in the left party, so I cannot tell how they decided on that. But my impression was that they really much focused on rent, on wages, and on taking taxes from the richest. So they really had a strong focus, and they did a lot of pop cultural reference in social media and campaigning. So they really made a very approachable campaign that really, like, you couldn't differ between a video that was made by a candidate from the left and one that was made by some influencer or something. It was very authentic, and they found a very authentic language especially on the platforms they were working on, and they had a strong focus on some key topics.
Just maybe to add, I think their campaign was mainly focused on the urban youth, and this already is kind of a problem when you ask yourself, how can you transfer that to the Social Democratic Party? Because we won't make only or provide or give policy answers for young people in urban city centers. We have to have a policy answer for everyone, which covers the whole of the generation, the society. But I still think that there are a few things that we can learn from their campaign. Their focus on social issues. It was, as Delara said, it was on rents, it was on pensions, it was on wages, it was on taxing the rich, but also on housing and rents. And I think this was actually where they showed that the left, although they are not in power, can actually deliver. They put up like an online calculator where you could see if the rent that you're paying is correct, and if the energy prices that you had to pay were also correct, or if they were too high. And a lot of those people who actually did these online calculations, they got a refund from the housing company where they lived in. So they actually saw that they gave them something where they had a rate of return, I would say. So, but making it more abstract, it was how in a positive way the left actually changed their daily life.
Thanks so much. So we have a lot of questions, but we are running out of time. So I pick, let's say, a rather short one from Rick Eaton. He's asking, is there any chance of CDU-CSU working with AfD if demands from the left, meaning the SPD in this case, are too high? So is this still a possibility? What do you think about it?
Do you want to go first?
Go first. You have to leave on time.
No, I don't think so, because like not in an official coalition, because it is very much not well perceived in the majority of German citizens. How they will do it then with some concrete policy areas, this is to be discussed. As I said, in the European Parliament, they already do it all the time. But for a fixed coalition, I don't think they have any other options than moving a little bit or risking new elections. But I'm not sure. Catrina, maybe you have another.
I also wouldn't say that this is an option this time. Well, there was a lot of reference to the Austrian case where there was this coalition between conservatives and the right-wing party, most likely, but actually that collapsed. These talks collapsed last minute, and now the talks are open again, I think. But I don't think that this will happen in Germany this time. Maybe if it happens, it will first happen on the local level, and to be prepared then, and then build up to the federal level, but not this time. I don't think so.
So, because we are running out of time, and this was scheduled just for 1 hour, so we have a couple of more questions about, for example, Nina Netzer is asking for the CDU controlling more of 500 CSOs with a parliamentary request for funding political activities. This is one of the particular focal points. So some like George Borlow are asking about the FDP, and other questions are about the performance of the traffic light coalition. Austria was mentioned by Julian Smith as well here. But since we are running out of time, I would say just a last round of answers from the two of you, and I'm coming back to Anne McGrath. So, what are the next steps for the SPD? Is her very simple question. And to add on this, so what are the strategic adjustments you think are necessary for progressive policymakers, especially in the SPD, in order to address Germany's evolving social and economic challenges in the next year? Just a brief last response session.
I did already say a lot on that, but in general, I mean, it's a little bit early to call. We had a very shocking election result. It's really something that we really have to dig deep and not give not deep diving answers for now. But what I think is structurally needed is a change on the head situation of the party. We have to see some changes and credible new actors coming up in the party. We have to make sure that we are not bowing down to weaken our social profile as a party in this coalition if it comes up, and we have to not sell sheep to the conservatives, because they have no other options, and we have to make sure that our lack of trust that we have in the society is not sold in a coalition with the conservatives. So I think this is a very delicate balance we have to find, and this is going to be a tough one. So I'm still also in the process of finding answers and not give so much smart answers now.
I think it's too early to tell, actually, because these are processes that need to take some time. First of all, we really need to understand the election results, what's actually led there. And if we are talking about the renewal or programmatic renewal of the party, this is also something that will not happen overnight. When you look at the CDU party manifesto that they gave themselves last year, they had a process of a year. They did that in opposition. So they had quite some advantages when you compare that to the current situation that SPD is in, if SPD will go in and build the coalition government. And if we are in a coalition government, we also need to compromise. So there are so many obstacles in advance. So I think it's really not easy to tell how the process will or how the result will look like, or how SPD will look like in a year's time. But I would hope for more for a more or a new approach when it comes to program and personnel.
Okay. Good final words, I think. So I would like to thank all of you. First and foremost, of course, our panelists, Delara and Catrina, and the audience for the questions or for being interested in this event in general, even though we are talking about results. This is what Catrina and Delara already highlighted. Even if you are talking about results, the results of an election, this might have been a more an event of an ongoing in an ongoing conversation. So at least this is what I hope, together with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation Office for the United States and Canada. We are starting here. So with this, as I would say, stay tuned and have a great rest of your day.